of the dollar, and then you're seeing movements such as in gold and other assets. And when you see that rise in rates, then that starts to affect the stock market, because what's happened now is that with bonds going down and stocks going up, the prospective returns now of stocks are now down low relative to the prospective returns of bonds. And so that upward pressure then starts to translate into a stock market pressure. That is the classic dynamic, and something that the Federal Reserve then, or any central bank, is in a position of not easily being able to manage, because it becomes more of a stagflationary environment. So the stagflation that we're seeing right now, the Fed wrestles with the question if it's tightening or if it's easing. That also has, in a economy where there is such a wealth disparity, but also think about the implications of whether you own stocks or whether you don't own stocks, and that difference. That impact is very different. That has huge political implications.
I say, given
so that's where that period.
Because this is an administration that has been very explicit in its desire for cuts, and this is part of the reason that Kevin Warsh is now our Fed chair, who of course has said, I am independent. Do you think throughout history there's often been bond markets that test a Federal Reserve chair? Is Kevin Warsh about to get a big test?
Of course. One man's debts are another man's assets. Okay, and if there's not a high enough real return, then those bonds are not appreciated. Okay, so what are you holding the bond for? You're holding it for a real return. So the markets ultimately, the marketplace can ultimately decide whether it owns it or not, right?
Do you think we head to the 1930s again, where it's a treasury that works with the Fed, that some of that independence is kind of chipped away out of a necessity to keep debt servicing costs low, for example?
I think it's exactly headed to that kind of thing, which we also saw a number of times through quantitative easing. It's called financial repression, and the idea is that you drive the bond yields down with buying of assets and so on. Sometimes it includes even foreign exchange controls to try to prevent money from going outside the country and so on, but to have that forced low real rates. And then that's usually accompanied by high taxation and a higher level of inflation to bring in revenue. And because money wants to go to other things, that's when gold has been illegalized, that's when foreign exchange controls come in, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying we're going that far, but I do think the reality is, yes, that the bond market either is fundamentally good by providing a high enough real return to compensate people, or it's going to be manipulated in a sense this way that will make it unattractive. In either case, it's relatively unattractive. And so money goes elsewhere, and that's just the way it works.
You've also been very forward and very early saying that the Strait of Hormuz is an issue for the U.S., and people followed on and said that, and now it feels like we're ignoring it. I know you've compared this to the Suez Crisis in 1956. Are we heading toward a similar environment where we become Britain, where if we can't control the Strait of Hormuz, that is something that could also cause a crisis of confidence in the U.S. and U.S. financial markets ultimately?
What we're seeing now, indisputably, and I travel around the world and I speak with world leaders. I was just a month in Asia and 10 days in China and so on. And what we're seeing around the world is the question of, can the United States fight a war in defense or an offsetting set of pressures of other powers, particularly China?
Right.
And in Asia right now, all the leaders I spoke with would say, it's clear that the United States cannot fight a war because the population doesn't want the cost of living impact, that they don't want people to die, they want it to be over fast. Okay, and also the country can't be overextended. How can it fight a war in the Middle East and fight a war there? It's getting overextended. Well, fact, that realization is having very big geopolitical implications for those who expect, because there was a policy of containment for China. Okay, there's Taiwan issue, and then around the Taiwan issue are questions of borders and so on. There was a process of containment.
Right.
That's over pretty much. And so as a result of that, there's a dynamic. Taiwan's very serious case because it's not just political, it's chips. And for example, it's entirely within the power of the Chinese government to basically say, let's put a blockade and let's have a week of no chips out coming out. Let's just imagine that signal was given to the market, that all the stocks, AI stocks and everything would crash. The stock market would crash.
Yes, and considering how high we're coming from, I would kind of love to combine these ideas because on one hand, you have the spending we're already doing. War has been incredibly expensive. That's more spending from the U.S. And then there's AI and the desire for AI sovereignty. Debt markets are being flooded with AI. Alphabet raising their equity offering to $85 billion. Are you concerned that there's a crowding out happening in this market? Can we handle that amount that's coming?
All great technology changes produce bubbles. And the reason they produce bubbles is because nobody can get it exactly right. Okay, you have to either spend a ton of money to capture your market share and so on, or, and don't worry about whether it's too much or not. Or you don't spend enough money and you lose your market share. And it's very imprecise with a lot of competition, okay? And then when people bet on the technology, which I'll bet on the technology, but they think that buying the stocks is betting on the technologies, which is a different thing, because the stocks can be expensive and so on. That's a problem. And what happens is when wealth grows a lot relative to incomes, I want to distinguish wealth from incomes. Okay, wealth is, you can create wealth very easily in the following way. You say, I'm going to have raise $50 million on $1 billion valuation. Okay, that's counted as $1 billion of money, and now you're a billionaire, but you only put up 50 million. Okay, and so wealth, you cannot spend wealth. Wealth is, you have to sell wealth to get money because you can only spend money. So when there's a lot of wealth relative to the amount of money there is a vulnerability, and bubbles burst when wealth needs to be converted into money.
Well, what is the trigger for that?
Often that's because of debt, but it could be for anything. It could be for wealth taxes, for example. Supposing you put in wealth taxes, then those people who have wealth are going to have to sell some of that wealth to pay taxes. That dynamic that I'm talking about accompanies the miracle technologies that over a period of time have wonderful implications for productivity. So I don't think it has a problem with productivity. I do think, but productivity, it has a big wealth gap implication. A very small percentage of the population is going to do unbelievably, and a lot of people won't. So what do? Can we work together politically to deal with those issues, and how do you do it? I do not believe, I'm not optimistic on us working together to solve.
So what's the end? Is it a bubble that bursts eventually?
I think it is, yes. And then that moment, there's always the issue of a bubble, and we can measure a bubble. I have indicators, and there's how many people are overowned, what's the sentiment, a lot of indicators for bubble, and we are right now rising closer to, not at, the same level in 2000 and same level in 1929.
Is there a specific level where you say, oh no, here's the one that we really need to worry about?
The thing about it is there's two parts to it. There's, quote, a bubble, and then there's the pricking of the bubble. And the pricking of the bubble happens when there's a need for wealth to be sold to get the money. Like normally in a dynamic of a debt problem.
Sure.
Okay, if you take Japanese bubble, take the 29 bubble, take the 2000 bubble, all of them have an element of, tightening money to because it can't go on forever. It'll find its bubble. The question is how long you let the bubble go before there's the pricking. So in order to do the market timing, to know how to market time, it requires both the understanding of the bubble and the looking for the pricking. And the pricking is the converting of wealth into money, because I need money in order, but I have wealth, so I have to sell some of the wealth in order to get the money. That's how it works. That dynamic is following that kind of path, even though it's a wonderful technology that'll have great
Ray, we could
impact.
talk about this all day, and I'm so upset we're out of time because I know you're using it specifically in your family office. So we're going to have to talk again specifically about that because I'm really interested to hear more about that too. Ray, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Really appreciate your time.